Merci d'être parmi nous aujourd'hui pour cette session. Je m'appelle Sarah et je suis l'animatrice pour cette session questions-réponses. La session sera bilingue, donc je demanderai des questions soumises par nos participants en anglais et en français et notre orateur ici, Normand, que vous voyez sur votre écran, répondra dans la langue correspondante. Just a little bit of background on Normand here. He is Lieutenant Colonel retired. He served with the Royal Canadian Engineers for more than 30 years. In the late 1990s, he was seconded to the Foreign Affairs Mine Action Team and became their advisor on mine warfare and mine destruction. In this role, he traveled to several countries to persuade them to join the Ottawa Treaty and witnessed and advised on anti-personnel landmine stock destruction. Normal also recently featured in our memory project video called Needle in a Scrapyard, Canada and Demining. Et en français, notre orateur aujourd'hui est le lieutenant-colonel retraité Ret'd Levert, qui a servi avec les génies militaires canadiens pour plus de 30 années. À la fin des années 1990, il a été détaché à l'équipe de l'action contre les mines du ministère des Affaires étrangères, où il est devenu leur conseiller sur la guerre des mines et sur la destruction des mines. Dans ce rôle, il a voyagé dans de nombreux pays pour les persuader à se joindre au traité d'Ottawa et pour surveiller la destruction de leur stock de mines antipersonnel. Normand a récemment fait partie de notre vidéo Une aiguille dans un dépôt de ferraille, Canada et le déminage. So that was a lot of information, but before we start, there's just one quick disclaimer. This event is being recorded. We will be allowing participants to turn on their video, but not have audio on. So those who choose to keep their cameras on may show up in the recording for this event that will also be posted to YouTube later on. Donc pour ceux qui choisissent de garder leur caméra allumée, il est possible que vous apparaîtrez dans l'enregistrement de cet événement qui sera publié sur YouTube plus tard. So, Normal, if you'd like to just quickly introduce yourself to everyone, I think that'd be really great.
Okay. Well, I think that Sarah did a wonderful job. I was in the Army almost 39 years, including my militia time. And then I reached retirement age. So therefore, I had to recycle myself as a consultant, still working for national defense. So I had some very interesting times and some very interesting missions. J'ai eu des missions très intéressantes dans mon temps dans l'armée. J'étais dans le génie militaire, comme Sarah nous a dit, et j'ai passé avec le temps de la milice presque 39 ans dans l'armée. C'est tout. Oh, we've lost Sarah.
Sorry, I was muted. We'll just dive right into the questions if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the first really interesting one is someone has asked, what inspired you to want to join the military?
A curiosity, I guess, but also I wanted to go to university. We were three boys at home, and my brother was definitively not Army material. So I ended up going to Collège Militaire Royal de Saint-Jean. And in order to have a recommendation to go to the military college and to have a taste of Army life, I joined the militia in the summer of '63. And I found I liked it. And then when I went to the military college, we would go through the Army and decide in which branch that we wanted to be. And when I saw the engineers, that was the branch for me. So that's why I went. I loved it.
Yeah, it sounds really cool. Like I can understand why you thought that was interesting. J'ai une question un peu similaire en français aussi. Quelqu'un a demandé comment êtes-vous arrivé de faire ce type d'emploi?
Eh bien, comme j'avais expliqué un peu, c'est que je voulais passer par l'université et pour le faire, aux frais de Sa Majesté, je pouvais aller au Collège militaire royal, ce que j'ai fait. Et ensuite, parce que j'ai été enrôlé dans l'armée, on avait le choix d'aller dans différentes branches de l'armée, l'artillerie, le blindé, l'infanterie, le génie. Et quand j'ai vu le génie, c'était ce qui m'avait fasciné. Il y a le rôle du génie est assez complexe, fascinant, beaucoup de bonnes choses à faire. Donc, c'est ce qui m'a attiré.
Oh, merci. Uh, the next question, hopping right into landmines and something that we mentioned in the video that features you. Someone asked, is there an international agreement about landmines?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. In fact, it's perhaps one of the fine flowers of Canada's diplomacy. There is a landmine, and the official name is. Da-da-da. I had it. It's called the Convention on the Prohibition of the Use, Stockpiling, Production, and Transfer of Anti-Personnel Mines and their Destruction. And it's known as the Ottawa Treaty. It was signed by 121, then 122 nations in December 97 and became in force in fact, the March of 1998.
And
Alors, en
I
français, c'est le traité d'Ottawa. C'est un traité qui voit l'interdiction des mines antipersonnelles et de leur destruction.
There was something I remember from one of our previous conversations that I think would be really interesting. Where were you in your career when the Ottawa Treaty was being drafted?
Well, by then I was at National Defense Headquarters, so I had done my field tour. I had been the commanding officer of 5e Régiment Génies in Valcartier. I also had the privilege of being the divisional engineer from 90 to 92. And back in Ottawa, I'm dealing with what we call requirements, which is essentially material, equipment, and part of all the roles I had with dealing with equipment, which was to try to get more equipment and new equipment or replace equipment. I was also the parrain, the godfather is not quite the right word. I was a sponsor for research and development that would help sustain and support military engineers. And that got us involved in mine detection, mostly mine detection because by 92s, by the 90s, Canada is being deployed to Bosnia, to Somalia, and we're running into landmines, and we're taking victims, and we had death. So that landmine detection became extremely important and topical for us. So that's where I was. I was doing equipment for the military, for the engineers, all sorts of things, bridging, mine detection, water purification, heavy equipment. But it's the mine detection, and that really brought me to this situation.
Well, thank you for that. And speaking of your work with mine detection, someone had asked also, what is the mine action team? Were you assigned to the team or did you choose to join yourself?
The mine action team was something that was set up in foreign affairs. So when foreign affairs decided in 96 to join the International Convention to Ban Landmine, or the ICBL, in order to focus people on this, they created a group or section in foreign affairs that was called the Mine Action Team, headed by a director who was ambassador level. And they were working with other nations to be able to get them to join the movement and eventually to join the treaty. And at that point, the foreign affairs started to interface with the director general of military engineers, because this is where the expertise on landmine was at the point. So that was a mine action team, of foreign affairs, and I think they lasted about 10 years. Now, the irony or the fun thing is that in the Canadian Armed Forces, we are all volunteers. So once you volunteered once, you're volunteered for everything. I was assigned to the team. I was at the right time, at the right place, and I had the right qualifications. So I was assigned to the team when the team became more active in 1998 with the signature of the treaty. I must add a little nuance in there is when we were going to Kosovo, or when Kosovo United Nations Mine Action Services were standing up, the ambassador asked me if I would volunteer to go, which I said yes after checking with my commander-in-chief, with my wife, and they got the permission from National Defense to loan me out to the UN nations. So, and to Kosovo, semi-volunteered, if you wish, to mine action team, simply assigned to the team.
OK, alors on a aussi, la même question maintenant, mais en français, si c'est possible, je peux la répéter aussi si vous voulez. Qu'est-ce que l'équipe d'action contre les mines des Nations Unies et avez-vous été désigné à l'équipe ou avez choisi de vous y joindre?
Oui, la question française est un petit peu différente. Aux Nations Unies, ils ont UNMAS, United Nations Mine Action Services. Ils ont commencé en 96, je pense qu'ils sont devenus officiels en 97, j'ai mes notes ici, et le premier projet de UNMAS, le projet officiel, a été justement le déploiement au Kosovo. Autrement, avant, le côté d'action mine ou service d'action mine des Nations Unies était relié avec les services de réfugiés, le service de bien-être, parce que naturellement, les mines antipersonnel créaient beaucoup de blessés dans différents pays. Alors, en masse était formé avec des volontaires qui venaient de plusieurs pays, enfin, plusieurs pays avaient prêté des gens aux Nations Unies, comme par exemple, mon patron, quand j'étais à Kosovo, était un Nouveau-Zélandais, un lieutenant-colonel Nouveau-Zélandais. Et dans l'équipe, on avait un Allemand, on avait aussi des Britanniques. Alors, plusieurs pays avaient prêté des gens, et quand la mission du Kosovo a été mise en place, à ce moment-là, le Canada a voulu aussi prêter quelqu'un et c'est moi qui ai été prêté.
OK, très bien et avant de continuer, just before we continue, I do want to let, the audience know if you have a question, um, there is a Q&A function that you will see at the top bar, of Teams. If you click that, you would be able to type out a question and submit it, and then, at the end, I will be, going through a few of them if we do have time.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. But for this questions that were submitted in advance, I'll keep going through those for now, if that's okay with you. The next question is, what was the most challenging aspect of your tour, and what was the most rewarding?
And that was a very interesting question. It's interestingly why the irony is that I went to very few minefields and very few mine clearance because my function was to go to the various military headquarters and get information on what they were doing in terms of mine clearing or where they were running into mines and tell us where they had found mines so that we could complete our data. They were not always all that they were welcoming, but they did not necessarily provide a whole lot of information. So the weird thing maybe was driving around was one of the interesting challenge because there had been nobody taking care of the highways, taking care of the roads for about 3 years as they were busy having this little war of themselves. So as you were driving around, sometimes there'd be a road portions of roads were missing altogether along the rivers because the road tends to be along the river. In the last 3 years or 2 years, the road would have simply eaten half the road away. And then NATO had bombed a number of bridges so that some of the bridges had holes in them. I remember playing slalom on a bridge, going from hole to hole and off one side and the other. It wasn't worth the shortcut. It was better to go by the normal road. But also many people came back who were not qualified drivers. And you got to get adjusted to every style of driving. What I found out is in Kosovo, they would feature your braking ability in their passing calculation. So as we'd be running to each other on the road, and swerving from one side of the road to the other, depending on where the big holes were. So is the guy coming at you doing the same thing. And then there's one behind that first guy. And you figure by Canadian standard, we've now reached the closer distance. And the guy, number two, punches out because it's the one little bit of a straight road for the next 4 or 5 kilometers and have to brake like crazy to be able to avoid having a head-on collision. So driving was more of a challenge. On the emotional side, what was difficult is to learn of children being hurt or killed by landmines or by unexploded ordnance. So that was hard. I did not witness any of the victims directly, but still, my children were 10 and 13, so I could immediately relate to what would happen to a child or what would happen to the mother or father of the child when something like that happened. That was hard.
I think that's a really important part of what you experienced when you were abroad as well during your service. If that's okay, I would like to ask the same thing in French. Je vais demander
Okay.
la même chose en français. Quel a été l'aspect le plus difficile de votre période de service et quel a été le plus gratifiant?
Bien, ce que j'avais dit en anglais, c'est que selon mes fonctions, je faisais affaire avec les quartiers généraux des différents armées qui étaient déployés à travers le Kosovo pour aller chercher de l'information sur les mines, l'état des mines, dans le sens est-ce qu'ils en avaient découvert ou est-ce qu'ils en avaient enlevé pour être capable de mettre nos informations à date. J'avais toujours un bon accueil, mais pas toujours la bonne information. Mais j'ai été assez rarement dans les champs de mines comme tels, ou là où il y avait du déminage. La partie peut-être la plus intéressante et un petit peu plus dangereuse au Kosovo, c'était les routes, conduire sur les routes. Les routes avaient été laissées sans aucun entretien pendant 2 ou 3 ans, donc il y avait des endroits où la rivière avait enlevé la moitié de la route ou qu'il y avait des déboulements à travers la route. L'OTAN avait aussi bombardé plusieurs ponts pour les détruire. Un pont en particulier avait survécu, mais avec plusieurs grands trous dedans. Je me rappelle, je l'ai emprunté une fois. Il fallait faire le slalom, passer autour des trous à travers le pont. En fin de compte, ça n'a pas sauvé de temps du tout. C'était plus simple de faire le déjou. La partie qui était difficile émotionnellement, ça a été quand j'apprenais que des enfants avaient été blessés ou tués. Mes enfants, dans ce temps-là, avaient 10 ans et 13 ans, donc je pouvais comprendre ce qu'une famille, ce qu'un père ou une mère pouvait ressentir quand on apprenait qu'un enfant avait été blessé ou tué. C'était la partie difficile. En même temps, je n'ai pas vu directement, j'ai pas été témoin de première ligne de ces accidents-là.
Merci d'avoir partagé en français aussi. J'ai une autre question en français qui suit bien celle-là. Donc, quelqu'un a demandé de tous les endroits où vous avez travaillé, lequel était le plus difficile?
D'abord, j'ai pensé, quand j'ai vu la question, est-ce qu'on parle de tous les endroits dans les 38 ans ou de tous les endroits dans les 6 mois du Kosovo?
Je, je pense dans les 38 ans.
En fin de compte, c'est moi qui donne la réponse. C'est intéressant. Je ne me rappelle pas vraiment de quelque chose que j'ai considéré comme difficile. Il y a eu des moments dans tous les exercices, quand vous êtes à moins 40 ou vous êtes à la grande pluie, où vous pouvez être c'est très incommodant ou c'est très accablant, mais c'était pas nécessairement difficile. C'est du travail d'équipe. J'ai toujours été chanceux de soit faire partie d'une bonne équipe ou d'avoir une bonne équipe. Quand j'étais commandant, j'ai eu des soldats qui étaient absolument fabuleux. Donc, on a eu des défis, mais il n'y a rien qui me revient à l'esprit comme ayant été plus difficile qu'une autre place. C'était à chaque fois intéressant, ça avait toujours des défis, mais pas particulièrement difficile que je me rappelle.
Oui, je pense que c'est une bonne chose, peut-être pour vous aussi. Poursuivre ça, je vais repasser à l'anglais. So the next question in English that we have is, what did you find the most rewarding in your work on demining?
And on this case, we're in demining directly. What is rewarding is the fact that it went well. I was there for 6 months. It turns out, and you can go and check online with the Kosovo demining, it was one of the most successful, if not the most successful, demining campaign. There were special circumstances that make it possible that they were able to have that much success and to have it in 3 years. But what again was interesting is the teamwork, the approach, which was flexible and tailored to Kosovo. And what was useful was what rewarding was to have been able to contribute to this situation, to be able to establish the relationship with the various army headquarters that I was dealing with. I was dealing eventually with, well, all 5 regions, but in terms of pure liaison, I was dealing with the British, the Americans, and the French. And these were the leading nations. They were more than just these 3 in these regions. So that was very interesting to be able to contribute to the success of the team. That worked well.
Of course. The next question I have here is, how has the technology changed over the years? I think
Well,
they're
it was
asking specifically as far as like mine detection and things like that.
I've been out of the game for a while, mind you. One of my, at the time, subordinate good friend carried on with mine detection. We loaned him to the United States for a while with joint effort with Canada and US and other nations in improving mine detection. We had, I was with Suffield, we were developing, for example, a remote control mine detectors that would check out 1 lane width at a time. It would check out 4 meters wide, and that was to be able to go down roads and to be able to check an entire road width at the time. That would otherwise everybody would be blocked. So that was useful. What has happened, I think, is one, we became smarter buyers. We learned that mine detection or mine detectors was just not the sensitivity of the mine detector, but you had to check the battery life. We had to check how well it worked with the soils from one place to another. So the perfect answer is a perfect answer for one locale, for one type of environment. If you're going to go from the dry desert of Africa to a very moist Cambodia, the mine detector that does the best job is not the same one. So that's what we learn in terms of not relying on a golden key or a silver bullet. We have to every time adapt to what's going on. In terms of mines, I think mines have not evolved all that much. What is becoming interesting, and it's on the periphery of landmines, is now you find that artificial intelligence is being applied to essentially hunting robots or killer robots. And that will create all sorts of problems for my fellow engineers who are behind me. And how do you deal with these various devices, some of which will be passive, like an off-route mine. These already exist. They simply would be able to make a smarter off-route mine. But these are anti-tank mines. In terms of anti-personnel mine, I don't think that the technology has evolved. It was already effective and cheap. The question is, can we find a better way to use it? And perhaps with artificial intelligence, you would be able to assist the human to recognize things more quickly.
I actually have a follow-up question for that is very similar, but it is a French one, and it follows
Mhm.
really well from what you were saying. Someone had asked, quelqu'un a demandé, est-ce que vous utilisez des robots? Est-ce que vous avez utilisé des robots?
Oui et non. Nous avons utilisé des robots parce que dans le génie, nécessairement, si on retourne ici à l'Afghanistan, c'est que la guerre de mines a évolué dans le cas de l'Afghanistan, où on est passé de mines fabriquées, de mines conventionnelles, si vous voulez, à des engins improvisés. Et alors, quand les gens ont commencé à faire des engins improvisés, deux choses sont arrivées. Ce n'est pas exclusivement en Afghanistan, c'était arrivé en Irlande aussi. C'est que dans un sens, les bombes deviennent de plus en plus grosses. Alors, si une bombe de 1 kg ne fait pas assez de dommages, on fait une bombe de 10 kg. Si 10 kg ne fait pas assez de dommages, on en fait une de 30, on en fait une de 40, ou même des plus grosses. Il y a des bombes improvisées qui sont énormes. Et la méthode de mise à feu est aussi changée ou a évolué. On se servait de téléphone cellulaire pour téléphoner, faire sauter la mine ou l'engin. On peut se servir de fil, on peut se servir de méthodes plus conventionnelles. Donc, il y a eu énormément de recherches et d'ouvrages faits par l'armée canadienne, par le génie canadien, pour le contre-mine et contre-engin improvisé. Alors, entre autres choses, justement, comme vous voyez dans les films, on a des petits robots montés sur chenilles qui vont aller investiguer et, dans certains cas, désamorcer des engins improvisés. On a aussi, comme j'avais mentionné, notre gros détecteur qui travaillait pour une largeur complète, qui était télécommandé et qui se sert beaucoup d'informatique pour comparer entre plusieurs détecteurs pour en arriver à la conclusion que oui, c'est une mine ou non, c'est pas une mine. Alors, la nature de chaque guerre est différente. Je pense que présentement, si on regarde à l'Afghanistan, pas l'Afghanistan, en Ukraine, de ce que j'ai vu sur YouTube, il y a beaucoup de mines anti-chars, il y a un certain montant de mines antipersonnel. Je ne pense pas que d'un côté ou de l'autre, on a le temps de faire des mines improvisées. Alors, ça va leur donner un problème différent. L'avantage de robots, dans certains cas, c'est que si on peut prendre la partie ennuyante mais dangereuse et la faire faire par un robot, à ce moment-là, une fois qu'on a les mines, une fois qu'elles sont découvertes, il y a des procédures pour s'occuper de la mine. Un grand danger, c'est de chercher la mine parce qu'elle a été cachée pour être un piège. Donc, déceler le piège, ça aide beaucoup. Après ça, on peut aller s'occuper du problème. Oui.
Oui, c'est très intéressant. Je ne savais pas ça du tout, moi non plus. Alors, il y a une autre question. Euh, Ah non, je l'ai déjà demandé celle-là. Alors,
Ouais.
euh, voyons. Ah, il y a une autre question française ici. Y a-t-il eu un moment où vous avez pu sentir l'importance de ce que vous faites avec le déminage?
Oui, essentiellement. Et puis ça, c'est une partie intéressante de l'histoire. Quand j'étais au Kosovo, beaucoup de journalistes me demandaient tout le temps combien de mines avez-vous levé? Combien de mines avez-vous levé? Ou encore combien de Blue 97, qui étaient des sous-munitions non éclatées, avez-vous relevé? Et il y avait des estimés qui disaient il y a X mines, il y a Y Blue 97. Donc, tous les jours, on va faire une soustraction et on va savoir si vous avez terminé le problème. Mais en réalité, un des actions qui a donné le meilleur service ou le meilleur résultat, c'est qu'on avait une équipe canadienne qui était tout petite, 3 hommes, donc pas assez pour faire du déminage. Mais après qu'on avait eu, entre autres choses, un accident où une petite fille, un incident où une petite fille avait perdu ses 2 jambes parce que quelqu'un avait piégé sa maison avec des grenades, un des services qui a été fait, qui a été coordonné par le Centre d'action, coordination d'action mine, a été d'envoyer des équipes de vérification pour aller dans les maisons et dans les écoles et approcher chaque maison avec l'idée qu'elle a été piégée. Et c'est ces gens-là qui avaient été entraînés anciennement dans le génie militaire, avaient les méthodes pour approcher de façon à détecter les pièges, de rentrer d'une façon plus sécuritaire et de passer à travers le foyer ou avec l'école d'un bout à l'autre, pour ensuite être capable de retourner et de dire cette maison est libre de traquenards, où cette école est libre de traquenards. Donc, on était capable de libérer des maisons où les gens pouvaient retourner sans l'inquiétude que la maison était piégée. Alors, on était déjà rendu en septembre, si vous voulez, septembre-octobre. On a une cellule de planification du côté militaire, du côté du quartier général de K4. Alors déjà, on parlait au côté planning à l'hiver. On n'était pas les seuls, les présidents de la commission aux réfugiés qui regardaient toutes les maisons qui avaient été incendiées. Comment seriez-vous capable de les rendre propres à l'hiver, au moins capable de fermer la couverture et que les gens aient un abri pour passer à travers l'hiver. Et pour ça, il fallait d'abord et avant tout être capable de dire cette maison est libre de munitions, elle est libre de traquenards. Alors, ça a été très satisfaisant d'être capable de déclarer quelque chose comme 1400 logis libres de traquenards. Je pense qu'en fin de compte, s'ils ont trouvé quelque chose, c'était minime. Il n'y avait pas grand-chose, mais au moins, on était capable de confirmer qu'il n'y avait rien.
I think it'd be great if we could repeat that in English because what you said really shows the positive impact that your work had on the locals for the countries where you worked, especially in Kosovo. So I can translate again just to give you a bit of a prompt.
Oh, no,
Was
okay.
there a moment where you felt the importance of what you did with demining?
Well, okay, what I said is journalists would come and ask Mine Action Coordination Center, how many mines have you lifted? How many Blue 97, which are scatter bombs, have you lifted? Because they were trying to run a countdown. We thought that there were X mines and there were Y Blue 97s, and then it's just a matter every day of writing it off, and then you get the zero and you mission accomplished, except X and Y were estimates, they were not real number. And that's not where we were getting, in a way, the best results. What I explained is that we had a small Canadian team that came to Kosovo. They were too few to be able to do mine clearing, but they were just the right size to do booby trap checking. And what happened when I was there, and I think it's around the end of August, a little girl lost both of her legs because somebody had mined, or in this case, booby trapped her house with a grenade in the stairwell. And so people were afraid to go back into homes or afraid to go back in schools for a very good reason. And this team, which had been military engineers, knew how to approach something that we suspect is booby trap and knew how to enter it from a safer direction and then go through the entire house to go through where you would find hidden booby traps, where you would find grenades or other explosive. And they were able, over the time, and I'm thinking in terms of September, October, they were able to declare something like 1,400 homes that were free of booby traps. So that allowed 1,400 families to have a place to go before winter. And winter was already approaching. The planning cells we were calculating, or not me, but K4 were calculating the snow and ice control and number of snow plows, everything else you would need to go through winter. UNHCR was trying to figure out all these burnt out houses. The walls are still standing because they're not building in wood over there, but the roofs were gone. So if you were able to fix the roof with a tarp, then somebody would be able to survive the winter by using the house. But you need to be able to be confident that the house is free of booby traps, free of explosive. And it was very satisfying. Very, very quiet. I think we actually found, or they found, very few booby traps, if any. They found a few, but it was not a number of how many mines you found. The question was, how many houses have you freed for occupation? And that was much more satisfying than finding garbage.
Certainly. There's actually a question I think that is a little bit related. Maybe your answer will be, I suspect, but it was asked in French, so I'll switch over again.
D'accord.
Alors, ils ont demandé pourquoi ne pas faire exploser les mines au lieu de les déminer?
Eh bien, parfois, si la mine est, on va prendre un exemple exceptionnel, mais si vous avez une centrale électrique avec des transformateurs et quelqu'un a planté des mines, c'est un truc qu'on faisait pour interdire de la réparation et que vous allez faire sauter la mine, vous allez faire beaucoup de dommages possiblement aux transformateurs et plonger tout le monde sans électricité. Donc, dans certains endroits, le dommage qui va être créé par la détonation de la mine est en fait beaucoup plus de dommages qu'on a besoin de faire. Donc, dans certains cas, c'est mieux d'être capable de retirer la mine ou de désamorcer la mine. Certaines munitions sont beaucoup plus dangereuses. À ce moment-là, on n'a pas beaucoup d'autres choix que de les faire sauter en place. Et aussi, ça demande beaucoup d'explosifs.
Oui, bien sûr. J'imagine aussi. Donc, I wonder, would you like to share that also for the English-speaking audience?
Yeah, the question was, why don't you blow them all up? And
Yeah.
my answer was that sometimes it's not very good idea because you're going to create more damage than it's worth it. And I gave the example that if you had landmines, anti-personnel landmines in a electrical substation, and you went in and simply blew up the landmines, you'd probably end up damaging the electrical equipment and plunging tens of thousands or thousands of people without electricity. And of course, everybody needs electricity to be able to lead a better life and rebuild the country. So in many cases, you rather remove the mine or désamorcer to defeat the mine in place, neutralize the mine in place by hand and then remove it rather than blow it in place because you need what's left or what's you need to keep the equipment that's in place. We also had two layers, if you wish. We had mines, but the other interesting problem that they had in Kosovo were unexploded bombs, and there were some really big ones. There was one at the airport, and the Russians had come in first, so the Russians were occupying the airport. NATO did not have access to the airport, but we knew that there was an unexploded 500-pound bomb in the airport, and it took a few weeks eventually to convince the Russians to let the British demining team, or not, sorry, demining team, but bomb removal team, bomb disposal team, to go in. And in this particular one, I think they had to blow it. It was out in the field, but you still need to move back a good distance when a 500-pound bomb goes off. So it was an interesting little incident.
That does sound like an exciting event. I actually have a question that's a little bit related. I thought it was quite interesting and amusing at the same time. Someone asked, "What does a bomb smell like?" And I wasn't sure if you would know, but now I do think maybe you do know.
Unfortunately, I don't have much of a sense of smell.
Right.
It could, the bomb that has not blown up, in many cases, if it's a big airdrop bomb from the sky or artillery shell, will have buried itself in the mud or buried itself in rubble, moved around in rubble. It might not smell any different than the rest of the countryside or the rest of the equipment that is there. I mean, to a dog, they would be able to smell things very, very nicely. With some teams were using dogs to find landmines, and I suspect you would also be able to find unexploded ordnance using dogs. Us humans, I don't think are terribly capable of discovering landmines or bombs by smell. Unless it blew up and then you have the smell of cordite. You're off again.
Yep. That's I think maybe what they were wondering, but I'm not 100% sure. But hopefully that answers your question. The next question I have here for you is, what is the biggest misconception the public has about landmines and landmine removal?
Well, one, and I was asked this question last week when I was making a presentation, or 2 weeks ago, a presentation to a high school. They asked me if it's true that it's a double click to set off a landmine because of all the movies you see where the fellow puts his foot on the landmine and then everybody freezes and then somebody comes in with a very clever ploy to be able to take the foot off. No, there's no double click on landmine. You step on it, it blows up, or you set it off, it blows up there. You don't have sort of, if you wish, a second chance. You might be extremely lucky with a tripwire if you sense the tripwire before you've actually pulled on the tripwire, but don't count on it. So that's one misconception I think that many people have. It's just like a light switch. If you flick it, it's on and it detonates. I think perhaps the second one is you don't realize how long it takes to do mine clearing. The progress is measured in centimeters per day. You'd be measuring in square meters per day. If you think in terms, well, Canada is exceptional. We're the second largest country in the world, but we're at 9 million square kilometer once you remove the lakes, and there's 1 million square meter in a square kilometer. So you're looking at 9 billion square meters in Canada. So you go somewhere else, smaller countries, but you still have to look at every square centimeter cleaned, or no, you need to detect, you need to check every square centimeter before you can say that this square meter is free, and then you carry on and carry on. So very labor intensive. This is why, for example, in Kosovo, you reach a point where certain parts of the land are not worth mine clearing. The objective, sometimes we think, oh, the objective is to do mine clearing and remove all the mines. Actually, the greater objective is to let people return back to a normal life. And if we can achieve that by putting a fence around a part that is hardly used ever, and let people safely out of that region, it's a good use, because resources are required to be able to rebuild, rebuild the houses, rebuild schools, rebuild the country. So there's a point where demining is too much for the result that you get.
And I think those are really enlightening answers to clear up some of those misconceptions that people may have. If it's okay, I'll ask it again in French. Quelle est la plus grande idée fausse que le public a au sujet du déminage?
Bien, j'ai commencé en expliquant, parce que la question en anglais au sujet des mines et du déminage. Alors souvent, beaucoup de gens ont l'impression, parce qu'on a vu tous les films d'action de Hollywood, que ça prend 2 pressions pour fonctionner une mine. On pile dessus, premier clic, on enlève le pied, deuxième clic. C'est pas comme ça. Vous avez seulement un clic. C'est très bon pour le cinéma d'avoir beaucoup de tension pendant qu'on est en train de désamorcer la mine. Quel type a mis pied dessus, mais c'est pas comme ça pour le vrai. Alors, le mieux qui pourrait vous arriver peut-être avec un fil de traquenard, c'est que vous avez senti le fil à la toute dernière seconde et que vous avez été capable de bloquer votre mouvement pour éviter que la mine soit enclenchée. Du côté du déminage, je pense que ce que les gens ne réalisent pas, c'est combien de temps ça prend. Le progrès en déminage, quand vous êtes à genoux, à 4 pattes en train de chercher les mines, de trouver les mines, désamorcer les mines, il est mesuré en centimètres. On fait le déminage au mètre carré, et comme j'expliquais en anglais, il y a 1 million de mètres carrés dans 1 kilomètre par 1 kilomètre. Donc, le temps pour déminer devient énorme. Et à ce moment-là, ça devient un peu une question de retour sur votre effort. Là où il va y avoir beaucoup de chance, là, on a besoin de retourner la terre à l'agriculture. On veut vraiment nettoyer en bonne profondeur pour être sûr qu'on assure la sécurité des gens. Mais il arrive un moment donné où on peut laisser le problème pour plus tard. On dit que, considérant le progrès, considérant les ressources qu'on a besoin, on va simplement clôturer une certaine région et puis dire n'y allez pas, c'est miné. En France, ils ont été obligés de faire ça pour la Première Guerre mondiale. Alors, il y a des parties de la France qui ont dû être abandonnées, qui n'ont jamais été nettoyées depuis la Première Guerre mondiale.
Merci beaucoup pour votre réponse en français aussi. The next question may be one of the last that I'll ask from the ones that I have prepared here. Someone asked, does a memory stand out from your service? A specific memory that you have that you'd like to share?
Well, that was also an interesting question. And what came to me was images upon images upon images of all places and various experiences. So it's not necessarily related to Kosovo. There's two of them that came up. One of them is slightly related to mine clearing. And the first one was when I was commanding officer, we were having a winter exercise, and we had the militia, which tend to be college student, university students. So the last chalk to take to the exercise, which was in the Parc de Laurentides, came in at about 5 o'clock. So we boarded the Chinook right behind my unit. It was already dark, and we flew out for about 15 minutes. And after 15 minutes, we are deep in Parc Lac des Laurentides, and was really interesting because we landed on the ice on the lake, and they kicked us off the aircraft and they boomed away. And there we are. It's a full moon. I believe it's -40, and it's really, really dark on the edges. So that was an interesting transition from going to the warmth of being in the building to being out in the forest with a small team at -40 degrees. The other thing that came to mind, and I see that it becomes related to mine action indirectly, is I was in a scientific conference in Moscow. The scientific conference was nuclear quadruple resonance for mine detection. And it was an international conference. It was sponsored also by NATO for Partnership for Peace. And what was really interesting is we had our delegation, we got to visit the Kremlin and had a tour by the curator of the Kremlin herself and her bodyguard. And we went from throughout the entire Kremlin, all the way back into the first dome built by the Mongols around about 1,000 years ago. So that was a very, very interesting experience. And it had to do with mine detection.
Those do sound really cool, and not a lot of people can say that they've done something like that either. I do actually have one more that was submitted quite recently before the event. Similar to this one, but what countries have you been to? Because you've been to so many. I personally know from our discussions, but I'm sure people would love to hear, like, what countries have you been to and which one was your favorite, would you say?
Very interesting. Well, some I've been to for a short time and others for a long time. So Western Europe, I've been to, of course, France, Benelux, Germany. I did Scandinavia, so we did Norway and Sweden and I get a blank in here. I went to Copenhagen, Oslo. I've also been to Finland with Foreign Affairs. The very interesting trip that we had with Foreign Affairs is we went to Georgia, and from Georgia I went to Kyiv in Ukraine, and from there we went to Chisinau in Moldova. And then I rejoined the team, and we did all 3 Baltic states, Lithuania, Lithuania, and Estonia, and then took the ferry and went to Finland. And so I had by then done all the Nordic stories. I went to South Africa and spent a day also in Mozambique. The Foreign Affairs sent me on a conference in Bangladesh. We went westbound to Bangladesh, came back, met the delegation from Georgia, and went back to Suffield in Alberta to show them mine detection. I have been to Honduras and Nicaragua to see mine demolition or mine destruction. Of course, time in Germany, which was very interesting all the time. That's the big ones, I think. Yes, United Kingdom, been to Scotland, and I've not been to Spain, Portugal, so la Suisse, bien sûr, l'Allemagne, l'Autriche. That's about the list, I guess.
Still a very long list, no? Very impressive list. Well, we are at about 150. We have maybe one more question before we wrap up. It was something that was submitted in the Q&A feature on Teams while you were answering my other question. Someone had asked, what equipment did you use to detect mines and deactivate them?
Okay, and this is going to be the royal we. I was trained on the equipment, and eventually, as I explained, when I was doing sponsoring research and development, we tested a whole number of mine detectors, but I did not personally use the mine detectors in real life situation. The combinations are, well, if you're on foot, if you're working by hand soldier, you will use on one hand a metal detector and a sensitive metal detector. You would also work by feel, a lot by look, to look for signs, traces that there's been mine activity. Often people who do mining are not very good at housekeeping. So you're looking around, and if there are empty boxes of ammunition that says mine or minen, then it's a sign there's been some mining activity. You're looking for the soil being disturbed. That works well if it's a recent activity. Once time has gone by, of course, the Mother Nature will have erased the traces of disturbance. And then I think the next thing would be feel. We also sometimes in places where you will have tripwire activated mines, we will use a coat hanger that you swing carefully through the grass or through the place, and you'll bring it up above your head on both sides slowly so that you can feel the tingle if it hits the wire, and then you know that you discovered a wire. So these are the main ones. We were using the remote control machine to look at 4 meters wide of road at one place at one time. I don't know what their successes are right now, because we then, during Afghanistan, eventually bought the equipment that the South Africans have used for road proofing. But it's basically, especially if you're doing it at the personal level, at one person at a time, it's the mine detector, and also a prodder. So you'll take a bit like an ice pick, and you'll plunge it at an oblique through the ground, with the idea that you'll hit something solid, and you know it's the landmine or might be a rock, but you're doing it by feel. And the reason you come in from the side, of course, is if you were to press from the top, you would set it up.
Hopefully
Oh
that.
yeah, and you have to be wide-eyed. You have to really pay attention to what you're doing.
I'm sure that does sound very quite perilous. But thank you for your question. I think it was Anita. Thank you. Well, it is about time for us to wrap things up, Normal. Time was really flown by while listening to your stories and anecdotes. It's always a pleasure. And on behalf of Historica Canada and the Memory Project, my sincere thanks to you, Nomo, for taking the time to share with me and with everyone who attended today.
Okay.
I do want to say also a big thank you to all the attendees for joining us and submitted such great questions. And we hope that we can do more similar events in the future as well. Nomo, if you have like any last word, anything you'd like to say to anyone before they leave.
Well, and we can see now with the war in Ukraine, the problem with wars is that when the war is over, it's not over with the war. We have a lot of cleaning to do. Some of it is intentional in the sense that landmines have been put there on purpose to hit somebody. but not necessarily the children or the farmers, but nonetheless, the mines are there. Also, all wars leave a certain amount of unexploded ordnance behind. If we look at the rate of firing and the war in Ukraine, the amount of unexploded bombs that are going to be there is going to be staggering, and they'll still be cleaning these things in about 25 years from now. So, yes, achieving peace and having a diplomatic solution and getting a ceasefire is really, really important. And then the hard work will start.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Normal. One last note for any teachers in attendance. If you'd like to book a speaker like Normal for a visit, either in person or online, similar to this format, with the Memory Project, you can do so on our website. The link will be posted either in the maybe in the Q&A section or in the chat section. Je vais répéter aussi pour les enseignants francophones. Si vous voulez réserver la visite d'un orateur comme Normand avec le projet Mémoire, vous pouvez consulter notre site web et le lien sera partagé soit dans le chat, soit dans la fonction Q&A de Teams. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And thank you again to Normand. It's always really nice to speak with you, and have a lovely day, everyone. Au revoir tout le monde et merci encore.
D'accord, merci beaucoup et à la
Merci
prochaine.
beaucoup. À la prochaine.